I shouldn't have opened the door that night. The storm was tearing through the Oregon woods like it had something to prove, rain slamming against my windows hard enough to make the glass rattle in its frame. The power had flickered twice already, and the only light in my cabin came from the lamp beside my couch and the occasional flash of lightning splitting the sky white. I told myself the sound on my porch was just a branch hitting the railing. I told myself that 3 times before I finally grabbed my phone and walked toward the door. When I pulled it open, the wind nearly knocked it out of my hand. And there he was, 6 feet of broad shoulders and soaked black fabric, collapsed against the wooden boards like he'd run out of road. For half a second, I thought he was dead. Then he moved, just enough to prove he wasn't. There was blood on his side, dark against his shirt, spreading slowly with the rain. "Help," he said, barely loud enough to carry over the storm. I should have called 911. That would have been the normal thing to do. Instead, I hooked my arm under his and felt the solid weight of him as I dragged him inside, inch by inch, my socks slipping on the hardwood floor. He was heavy, at least 200 pounds, and even injured he felt strong. Too strong for a random stranger who'd simply taken a wrong turn down a rural road. I laid him on my couch and grabbed the small first aid kit I kept in the kitchen drawer. I'm not a doctor. I teach 3rd grade in a town with 1 stoplight and a gas station that closes at 9 p.m. But growing up with 2 brothers taught me enough to know when something needed pressure and when it needed stitching. His injury wasn't what scared me. It was the rest of him. The tailored fabric. The watch on his wrist that probably cost more than my car. The faint scent of expensive cologne beneath the rain and iron. "I was mugged," he murmured when I pressed a towel against his side. His voice was low, controlled, even in pain. I looked at him, really looked at him. Men who get mugged don't usually have scars like that, thin white lines along their ribs, old and deliberate. My hands trembled anyway. I cleaned the wound. I worked in silence. Outside, headlights cut through the trees. Once, then again, slow passes along the dirt road that led only to my cabin. My stomach tightened. "You need to turn off the lights," he said suddenly, eyes still closed. Not a suggestion, an order. I hesitated for 1 heartbeat too long before flipping the switch. The cabin dropped into darkness except for lightning flashing through the curtains. Another set of headlights rolled past. Closer this time. I stood there in the quiet, my phone in my hand, thumb hovering over 911. If I called, this would become someone else's problem. If I didn't, it would stay mine. He shifted on the couch, jaw tightening but not making a sound. For reasons I still don't understand, I lowered the phone. And that was the moment everything changed. I do not know why I stayed. Maybe it was the way he did not beg. He did not plead. He simply endured, jaw tight, breath controlled, like pain was something he had made a deal with years ago. The storm outside softened slightly, but the headlights returned, slower this time, cutting across my dark living room walls in long white slashes. I felt exposed even with the lights off, as if the trees themselves were watching. "They are looking for you," I whispered. It was not a question. His eyes opened then, steady and unreadable. Even in near darkness I could see how sharp they were, how aware. "Yes," he said. Just that. No apology. No explanation. My heart thudded so loudly I was sure whoever was out there could hear it. "Who are they?" I asked. He studied me for a long second, as if measuring something invisible. "People who do not like unfinished business." That was not an answer. It was a warning. I swallowed and went back to the kitchen, hands shaking as I rinsed the cloth in the sink. The water ran pink for a moment before clearing. I told myself it was just fabric and skin and a bad night. I told myself I was still in control. Another set of headlights paused at the end of my gravel driveway. Not passing. Waiting. My breath caught. He shifted slightly, testing his side, but did not try to stand. "If they knock," he said quietly, "you did not see me." The certainty in his voice irritated me more than it should have. "You do not get to give me instructions in my own house," I whispered back, though my voice lacked heat. A faint curve touched his mouth, not quite a smile. "You already chose." The words settled heavily between us. He was right. I had chosen the second I dragged him inside instead of dialing 3 numbers. The headlights eventually moved on, tires crunching against wet gravel, fading back toward the main road 2 miles away. I did not realize I had been holding my breath until the sound disappeared. Silence rushed in, thick and fragile. I walked back to the couch and checked the bandage. It was holding. His pulse beneath my fingers was strong, steady. Too steady for someone who claimed to be a victim of random chance. "What is your name?" I asked. A pause. "Daniel," he said. It came too quickly. I did not call him out on it. Instead, I leaned back in the armchair across from him, arms wrapped around myself against the chill creeping through the cabin walls. The storm had started to drift east, thunder rumbling farther away now. For a moment, it felt almost peaceful. Then my porch steps creaked. Not the wind, not a branch, a deliberate weight. His eyes locked onto mine instantly. Awake, focused. The air changed. I stood slowly, every nerve in my body alive. A knock came next. 3 firm taps against my front door. Not loud, not frantic, controlled. "Ma'am," a male voice called out from the other side. "We are looking for someone. Have you seen a man on foot out here tonight?" My hand tightened around the edge of the wall. I could feel his gaze on me from across the room, waiting to see what I would do, waiting to see who I would be. My throat felt tight as I stepped toward the door, every board beneath my feet suddenly too loud. I forced my voice steady before answering. "No," I called out, praying it did not shake. "I have not seen anyone." Silence followed. Not empty silence. Listening silence. I could picture them on the other side, measuring the space between my words. "You live out here alone?" the man asked. The porch light was still off, the cabin wrapped in darkness except for the faint spill of moonlight through the trees. "Yes," I said. "Just me." Another pause. Then the sound of a boot shifting against wet wood. "If you see anyone, you call the county sheriff. There is a dangerous situation nearby." Dangerous situation. The words curled around my spine. I glanced over my shoulder. Daniel was sitting upright now despite the injury, shoulders squared, eyes clear and focused like he had never been close to losing consciousness. He did not look like a victim. He looked like a man calculating distance and timing. "I understand," I replied. "Thank you." I waited, counting my own heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. Finally, footsteps descended my porch steps. Gravel crunched. An engine started somewhere beyond the trees. I did not move until the headlights faded completely. Only then did I lock the door, slide the chain into place, and lean my forehead against the cool wood. My hands were trembling. "You lied very convincingly," he said quietly from the couch. I turned slowly. "I am not in the habit of lying to strangers. I am not a stranger anymore." The statement landed heavier than it should have. I walked back into the living room and stood a few feet away from him, arms crossed. "Then who are you?" I asked. His gaze held mine without blinking. The storm had almost passed, leaving only a soft drizzle tapping against the roof. In the dim light, I could see the sharp lines of his face, the controlled way he held himself. "If I tell you," he said, "you do not get to pretend this was a simple good deed." My stomach tightened. It already is not simple. He studied me for a long moment, then looked toward the window as if listening to something beyond human hearing. "My name is not Daniel," he said finally. "That was the only safe thing I could give you." I exhaled slowly. I had known it was false. Still, hearing him admit it made everything shift. "Are they going to come back?" I asked. "Yes," he answered without hesitation. "Not tonight, but soon." The certainty in his voice felt heavier than the storm clouds had. "Then you need to leave," I whispered. "You cannot stay here." A faint, almost amused expression crossed his face. "I will leave," he said, "when my men find me." The word stopped my breath. "Your men?" He held my gaze steadily. "Now, you invited something into your home tonight," he said softly. "Something much bigger than you realize." And for the first time, I believed him. The room felt smaller after he said that, like the walls had leaned in to listen. I stared at him, trying to reconcile the man who had nearly collapsed on my porch with the one sitting upright on my couch now, composed and deliberate. "Your men," I repeated quietly. The words did not belong in my living room with its worn throw blankets and secondhand coffee table. He gave a single nod. "They will be searching the surrounding roads by now." There was no arrogance in his tone, just fact. I crossed my arms tighter over my chest, more to steady myself than to challenge him. "So you are not just some man who took a wrong turn." It was not a question. His gaze softened slightly, though the intensity remained. "No." The honesty in that single word unsettled me more than any lie could have. Outside, the rain slowed to a faint whisper against the trees. The storm had moved on, leaving the air heavy and clean. I walked to the window, and pulled the curtain back half an inch. The dirt road stretched empty under the pale glow of moonlight. Peaceful, almost deceptively so. If people are looking for you, I said slowly, and other people are looking for you too, then my house is not safe. He watched me stand there, weighing my options. You should have let me stay outside, he said. It was the first time his voice carried something close to regret. I turned back toward him. You would have passed out on my porch. Possibly. A faint, controlled breath left him. You are not afraid enough. That stung. You do not know what I am feeling. His eyes held mine steadily. I know you had the chance to walk away twice tonight. And you did not. I opened my mouth to argue, but nothing came out. He was right. I could have called for help. I could have opened the door and told those men exactly where he was. Instead, I had chosen him. What happens when your men get here? I asked. He leaned back slightly against the couch, careful of his side. They will secure the area. They will ensure you are not questioned again. The phrasing was careful. Secure. Ensure. Words that suggested power without ever describing it. My heartbeat quickened. And then, a pause. His jaw tightened, just slightly. Then we will discuss what to do about you. The words should have terrified me. Instead, they ignited something else. Anger. About me? I stepped closer before I could stop myself. I am not a problem to be handled. He looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw something almost human beneath the composure. Not dominance. Not calculation. Something heavier. You are someone who lied for me, he said quietly. That changes the equation. The air between us felt charged, not with danger exactly, but with inevitability. In the distance, faint at first, I heard it. Engines. More than one. Not speeding. Moving with purpose. My stomach dropped. He heard them too. His eyes shifted toward the window, then back to me. They are here, he said softly. And I understood with sudden clarity that the night was far from over. The engines grew louder, steady, and synchronized, not like the uncertain patrol from earlier, but deliberate, controlled. I stood frozen in the center of my living room as beams of white light swept through the trees and spilled across the front of my cabin. Not one vehicle. Several. The gravel outside crunched in overlapping rhythms before going silent all at once. My pulse hammered in my ears. He rose from the couch despite the injury, moving carefully but without hesitation, like pain was an inconvenience he refused to acknowledge. He did not look like a man being rescued. He looked like a man reclaiming territory. Headlights stayed on, illuminating the front of my house in harsh white lines that erased every shadow. I realized my hands were clenched into fists. Stay behind me, he said quietly. The authority in his voice was instinctive, not forced. I almost argued, almost reminded him that this was my home. But something in the way he squared his shoulders stopped me. There was no fear in him, only readiness. A car door opened. Then another. Footsteps approached the porch, measured and confident. Not rushed. Not frantic. Someone knocked once, firm and controlled, the same rhythm as before, but this time different. Respectful. He moved toward the door, and I caught his sleeve without thinking. His eyes flicked down to my hand, then back up to my face. You should not be near this, he said softly. It is already near me, I replied. For a brief second something unreadable crossed his expression. Not anger. Not frustration. Something almost protective. He opened the door before I could process that thought. The porch light flicked on automatically, flooding the entryway with gold. 4 men stood there in dark suits that fit too well to be accidental. They were not county sheriffs. They were not lost travelers. They stood straight when they saw him, relief passing across their faces in subtle shifts of posture. Sir, one of them said quietly. Just that. Not his name. Just a title. He stepped onto the porch, and the difference in him was immediate. Broader. Colder. Untouchable. Report, he said. The single word carried weight. The man closest to him spoke in low tones I could not fully hear, something about cleared roads and neutralized threats without ever describing what that meant. My gaze drifted past them to the vehicles lining my driveway. Black SUVs. Polished. Powerful. Out of place against my weathered cabin and muddy tires. He listened without interrupting, jaw tight, eyes scanning the tree-line as if expecting the world itself to challenge him. Finally, he gave a slight nod. Secure the perimeter, he said. No one comes within half a mile. Half a mile. My breath caught. That was the entire stretch of forest around my home. The men moved instantly, No hesitation, dispersing into the darkness with quiet efficiency. He turned back toward me then, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. The air in my living room felt different now. Charged. Claimed. You see, he said softly, studying my face as if memorizing it. I told you my men would find me. I swallowed, trying to steady my voice. You still have not told me who you are. A faint, almost regretful expression touched his eyes. No, he said, but you are about to find out. He did not answer right away. Instead, he walked past me toward the center of the room, his presence filling the space in a way that made my small cabin feel even smaller. The porch light cast a soft glow through the window, outlining his profile in gold and shadow. For a moment, he looked less like an injured man and more like someone carved from something unbreakable. My name is Sebastian Rossi, he said finally. The words settled into the air with quiet weight. I had heard that name before. Not in conversation, not in my town, but in headlines that flickered across late-night news segments, in articles people whispered about before changing the subject. Powerful businessman, private investor, influential figure on the West Coast. And beneath those polished descriptions, rumors that never quite disappeared. I felt my pulse skip. Rossi, I repeated softly, as if testing the sound of it. His eyes held mine, searching for recognition. You found it. Yes, he said. No denial. No softening. Just truth. I stepped back without meaning to. You are not just someone with men and cars, I said. You are someone people are afraid of. A faint exhale left him, not quite a laugh. Fear is efficient, he replied. Outside, I could see silhouettes moving at the edge of the tree line, disciplined and silent. My quiet stretch of forest now guarded by men who answered to him without question. It felt unreal, like I had stepped into a different world without leaving my front door. Why were they looking for you? I asked. He considered me for a moment, then walked toward the kitchen sink where I had left the blood-stained cloth. He rinsed his hands slowly, methodically, watching the water run clear. There are people who mistake patience for weakness, he said. Tonight, they tested that assumption. He turned off the faucet and faced me again. There was no anger in his expression, no visible resentment, just certainty. And now? I asked. He walked closer, stopping a few feet away. Not invading, not retreating. Now they understand. The simplicity of his tone unsettled me more than any detailed explanation could have. I folded my arms tightly, trying to gather the scattered pieces of my thoughts. You said we would discuss what to do about me, I reminded him. His gaze softened slightly, though the intensity remained. You protected me, he said quietly. You placed yourself between me and men who would have asked more difficult questions. I swallowed. I just did not want strangers knocking on my door again. Intent does not erase consequence, he replied. The words were not threatening. They were factual. I felt the weight of them settle into my chest. So what happens now? I asked. He looked toward the window, toward the black SUVs lining my driveway, then back at me. Now, he said softly, you are no longer invisible. And somehow, that felt like the most dangerous thing he had said all night. Invisible. The word echoed in my mind long after he said it. I had built my entire life around being exactly that. A small-town teacher in a cabin 2 miles off the main road. Someone who graded spelling tests on Sunday afternoons and bought groceries at the same store every Thursday at 5. Safe. Predictable. Unnoticed. And now black SUVs were parked outside my home like silent witnesses to a choice I could not undo. I never asked to be visible, I said quietly. He studied me with an intensity that felt almost personal. No one ever does, he replied. Outside, one of his men approached the porch again, knocking once before stepping inside with a respectful nod. Sir, the road has been cleared. Local patrols will not interfere. We recommend relocation within the hour. Relocation. The word hit harder than it should have. This was my home. My books lined the shelves. My coffee mug still sat in the sink. The small framed photos of my parents rested on the mantel. I looked at Sebastian, waiting for him to dismiss the suggestion. He did not. Prepare the vehicle, he said calmly. The man nodded and left without another word. I felt something shift inside me. I am not going anywhere, I said, more firmly than I expected. His gaze returned to mine, not surprised, not angry. You do not understand the scale of this, he said quietly. I understand that this is my house, I answered. The silence between us tightened. For a moment, I thought he might argue. Instead, he stepped closer, lowering his voice. Tonight, you became connected to me, whether you intended to or not. That connection does not disappear because you wish it to. I felt heat rise to my face, not from fear, but from frustration. You do not get to decide my life because I chose to help someone bleeding on my porch. His jaw flexed slightly, not in anger, in restraint. I am trying to prevent your life from being decided by someone else, he said. The words were steady, but there was something beneath them. Not dominance, not threat, protection. I did not want that from him. I did not want anything from him. If I leave, I said slowly, it is because I choose to, not because you command it. A faint flicker of something almost like respect crossed his expression. Then choose, he replied. Outside, the engines idled softly, patient and waiting. I looked around my cabin, at the quilt draped over the armchair, at the stack of ungraded papers on the table. My normal life felt fragile now, like thin glass under pressure. If I step into one of those vehicles, I asked quietly, what happens next? He did not hesitate. You come with me. Somewhere secure. Until this settles. Somewhere secure. His world. Not mine. My heart pounded as realization settled in. There was no returning to before. Not truly. I met his eyes, searching for deception, for manipulation. I found neither. Only certainty. And something else. Concern. You said I am no longer invisible. I whispered. He nodded once. That is not always a curse, he said softly. I was not sure if that was a promise or a warning. I did not realize I was shaking until I reached for my coat and missed the sleeve twice. The engines outside continued their low, patient hum, like they had all the time in the world. Sebastian did not rush me. He stood near the door, posture straight despite the bandage beneath his shirt, watching without pressure. That unsettled me more than if he had insisted. I grabbed my phone from the kitchen counter, my keys from the small wooden bowl by the door, then hesitated in the center of the room. How long? I asked quietly. He understood the question immediately. A few days, he said. Long enough to make it clear that you are not to be approached. Not to be approached. As if I were suddenly marked property. I lifted my chin. I am not something to be claimed. His eyes held mine steadily. You are someone to be protected. The distinction mattered to him. I could see that. Outside, one of the SUVs shifted position, headlights sweeping briefly across my living room wall. The light caught the framed photographs on the mantel, the simple life I had built piece by piece. I walked over and picked up the smallest frame, my parents smiling back at me from a summer long past. For a moment, doubt nearly rooted me to the floor. If I stepped outside with him, there would be no pretending this was a strange night that would fade by morning. This would follow me, change me. I set the frame back down carefully. If I come, I said slowly, it is temporary. He gave a single nod. Temporary. The words sounded different in his voice, heavier. I slipped my coat on and opened the door. The cool night air hit my face, sharp and clean after the storm. The forest that had always felt protective now seemed alert, aware of everything. For SUVs lined the driveway, dark and immaculate against the mud and pine needles. Men stood near them in quiet formation, their movements precise but never hurried. When I stepped onto the porch beside him, their attention shifted subtly. Not to me, to him. Respect radiated in small gestures, in the way they straightened, in the way they waited for his signal before moving. I felt small and exposed under the open sky. Sebastian walked slightly ahead of me, not touching, but close enough that I sensed his awareness of every step I took. A man opened the rear door of the nearest vehicle without being asked. The interior glowed softly, leather and polished metal reflecting the faint moonlight. I paused before getting in. If I change my mind, I said quietly, looking up at him, I leave. He met my gaze without hesitation. If you change your mind, he replied, I will make sure you are safe when you do. It was not a cage he was offering. It was a promise. I searched his face for manipulation, for control. I found something steadier, something resolute. My heart pounded once more, then I stepped inside the vehicle. The door closed with a solid, final sound that echoed louder than the storm ever had. And as the convoy began to move, pulling away from the only home I had known, I understood that protection came with a cost I had not yet begun to measure. The drive felt longer than 2 miles. Maybe because every turn of the tires pulled me farther from the version of myself that believed life was simple. I sat in the back seat, hands folded tightly in my lap, watching the dark outline of trees blur past the tinted windows. The interior smelled faintly of leather and something clean, expensive, controlled. Sebastian sat across from me in the opposite seat, posture steady despite the bandage beneath his shirt. He had not spoken since we left the cabin. Neither had I. The convoy moved with quiet precision, headlights cutting a clean path through the narrow forest road before merging onto the highway. I had driven that stretch 100 times in my small sedan, radio on low, coffee in the cup holder. Tonight, surrounded by black SUVs traveling in perfect formation, it felt like a different world. "Where are we going?" I finally asked, my voice softer than I intended. He looked up from whatever thoughts held him and met my eyes. "My estate," he said simply. "Estate. Not house. Not apartment." The word carried history and power and distance from anything I recognized. I swallowed. "Is it far?" 40 minutes, he replied. "Just outside the city." The city lights began to appear in the distance, faint at first, then stronger as we approached. I realized I had not been this close to downtown at night in months. My life rarely required it. Sebastian studied me with that same measured attention, as if committing every reaction to memory. "You can still change your mind," he said quietly. The offer surprised me. "Can I?" I asked. He did not hesitate. "Yes." The certainty in his tone felt real, but something inside me knew that even if I stepped out of this vehicle at the next exit, nothing would return to normal. My face had been seen. My home had been marked. My name would not be invisible anymore. I shook my head slowly. If I turn back now, I walk back into questions I cannot answer. His gaze softened just slightly. "Then you stay?" he said. It was not a command. It was acknowledgement. The convoy exited the highway and turned down a long private road lined with tall iron fencing. The gates ahead opened automatically as the lead vehicle approached, metal sliding aside with silent efficiency. Beyond them, lights illuminated a sprawling property set against the dark hillside. It was not flashy. It was deliberate. Stone walls, large windows, guarded entrances, controlled space. I felt my breath catch as we drove through. This was not just wealth. This was infrastructure, security, influence. The vehicles rolled to a smooth stop beneath a covered entrance. One of the men stepped forward to open my door. Cool night air brushed my face as I stepped out onto polished stone instead of wet gravel. I looked up at the towering structure before me, then back at Sebastian as he exited his vehicle. He stood straight, fully in his element now, no longer the injured man on my couch. The men around him waited for direction without speaking. He walked toward me, stopping close enough that I could see the faint tension still present beneath his calm. "Welcome," he said quietly. Not possessive, not triumphant, just steady. I realized then that the storm had not ended when we left my cabin. It had simply changed form. The doors opened before we reached them. Not automatically, but because someone inside had been watching our approach. Warm light spilled across the stone steps, soft and controlled, nothing like the harsh sweep of headlights from earlier. I followed Sebastian inside, my shoes echoing faintly against polished marble. The air smelled faintly of cedar and something subtle I could not name, clean and deliberate. The entryway alone was larger than my entire cabin. High ceilings, quiet lighting, security cameras positioned so discreetly they were almost invisible unless you were looking for them. He did not pause to admire any of it. This was not display. This was infrastructure. A woman in a tailored navy suit approached with calm efficiency. "Sir, the doctor is waiting," she said softly. He gave a small nod. "Doctor? Of course. His injury." I had almost forgotten in the scale of everything else. He turned slightly toward me. "You will be shown to a guest suite," he said. Not dismissed. Not commanded. Simply arranged. I felt suddenly aware of the mud still clinging to the hem of my jeans, the simplicity of my coat, the way I did not belong against stone and glass and quiet power. "I can wait," I said. "You are injured." His eyes held mine for a fraction longer than necessary. "I have been injured before," he replied. "You have not." The meaning settled in slowly. This was not about physical wounds. It was about shock. Displacement. I opened my mouth to protest, then closed it. I was tired. Not just physically. My mind felt stretched thin from everything that had shifted in the past few hours. A second staff member approached and gestured gently down a wide hallway. I hesitated before following, glancing back once. Sebastian stood in the center of the foyer, surrounded by quiet movement, speaking in low tones to a man I assumed was the doctor. Even injured, he did not lean, did not waver. He existed as if the space had been built around him. The guest suite was larger than my cabin's entire living area. Soft lighting, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city below, a bed that looked untouched by chaos. The door closed quietly behind me. I stood in the center of the room, uncertain what to do with my hands. My reflection stared back at me from the glass. Same face, same brown hair pulled into a loose knot, same teacher who worried about lesson plans and parent emails. But something behind my eyes had changed. I walked to the window and looked down at the distant lights. The city stretched endlessly, alive and unaware of the quiet decisions being made inside these walls. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. I turned to find Sebastian standing in the doorway. He had changed into a clean shirt, the bandage hidden beneath crisp fabric. He looked composed again, untouched. "The doctor says I will recover quickly," he said. I nodded, unsure why relief washed through me so strongly. "Good," I replied. Silence lingered between us, not awkward, but heavy with everything unspoken. "You should rest," he said quietly. I studied him for a long moment. "And you?" His expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened. "I have work to finish," he said, and I understood that the storm had followed him here. Sleep did not come easily. I lay on the unfamiliar bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of a building that never truly rested. Somewhere beyond the walls, doors opened and closed in controlled rhythm. Low voices carried through distant hallways. The estate was quiet, but it was never still. I closed my eyes and tried to picture my cabin, the uneven creak of the floorboards, the way wind moved freely through the trees. Here, everything was sealed. Contained. Safe, perhaps, but contained. After what felt like hours, I gave up on sleep and slipped out of bed. The carpet beneath my feet was soft and silent as I crossed to the window. The city below shimmered in scattered gold lights, traffic moving like thin streams of fire through dark veins of asphalt. I wrapped my arms around myself and wondered how one night could redraw the outline of an entire life. A soft knock came at the door. I turned, my pulse quickening, but the voice that followed was calm and feminine. "Miss Carter, may I bring you tea?" I hesitated before answering. "Yes." The door opened to reveal the same woman in the navy suit from earlier. She carried a small tray, porcelain cup steaming gently. Her posture was precise, but not unkind. She set the tray on the table near the window. "If you need anything, you may call this number," she said, placing a card beside the cup. I glanced at it. A direct line. No name. "Does he ever sleep?" I asked before I could stop myself. The woman paused for just a second. "He rests when necessary," she replied carefully. Not quite an answer. After she left, I carried the tea to the window and let the warmth seep into my hands. I tried to make sense of the man I had brought into my home. The injured stranger, the calm authority, the way he had offered me a choice and yet left no room for illusion. There had been something in his eyes when he said I was no longer invisible. Not satisfaction, not ownership, something closer to resolve. The door opened again, this time without a knock. I turned sharply, heart jumping, but it was him. He stood just inside the threshold, jacket removed, sleeves rolled to reveal forearms marked with faint scars that spoke of a past I could only guess at. He did not cross the room. He did not need to. "You should be asleep," he said quietly. "So should you," I replied. For a moment, silence stretched between us. Then he stepped closer, stopping at a respectful distance. "The situation has been handled," he said. "There will be no further disturbances." I searched his face for signs of strain, for anger, for anything reckless. I found composure. Control. "Is that supposed to reassure me?" I asked softly. His gaze softened almost imperceptibly. "It is meant to." I looked down at the city again. "You live like this every day?" "Yes." No hesitation. I turned back to him. "And you do not get tired of being watched?" A faint, almost unreadable expression touched his features. "You learn to watch back." The words lingered in the air, steady and unyielding. And for the first time, I wondered what it would mean to stand beside someone who never stopped watching the world. Morning arrived quietly, pale light spilling across the city and filtering through the tall windows of the guest suite. I had not truly slept, only drifted in and out of shallow thoughts that felt heavier than dreams. When I finally rose, the estate was already awake. Somewhere down the hallway, measured footsteps passed in steady intervals. The world here did not ease into the day. It began with intention. I changed into the fresh clothes that had been placed neatly at the foot of the bed, simple but unmistakably high quality. Even that small detail reminded me I was operating inside someone else's system now. When I stepped into the hallway, a staff member greeted me by name as if it had always belonged within these walls. "Mr. Rossi is in the West Wing," she said politely. Not if I wished to see him, simply informing me where he was. I followed the corridor until it opened into a wide glass-walled office overlooking the hillside. He stood near the window, sunlight outlining his figure, phone pressed to his ear. His voice was calm, deliberate, speaking in low tones about timelines and negotiations. Nothing raised, nothing emotional, just control. He ended the call and turned before I could announce myself, as if he had sensed me. "You did not leave," he observed quietly. "You said I could," I replied. "You did not say I should." A faint flicker of approval crossed his face, subtle but real. "How are you feeling?" he asked. It took me a second to understand he was not referring to physical exhaustion. "Out of place," I answered honestly. He nodded once. "That will fade." I stepped closer, folding my arms lightly. "You seem very certain of that." "I am certain of many things," he said. "You being unsafe without structure is one of them." The word structure lingered. Not prison, not control. Structure. "You think this is safer for me?" I asked, gesturing lightly toward the estate. "Yes," he replied without hesitation. "For now." The honesty disarmed me. He could have offered promises. He did not. Instead, he gave measured truth. I studied the space around us. Large screens displayed security feeds from the gates and surrounding roads. Maps with marked routes glowed softly on one wall. This was not paranoia. It was preparedness. "How long does for now last?" I asked. His gaze held mine steadily. "Until those who sought me understand that you are not leverage." The word sent a chill through me. Leverage. I had not considered that possibility in concrete terms. He saw the realization in my expression, and his jaw tightened slightly. "You are not a pawn," he said quietly. "I will not allow that." The conviction in his voice felt personal, not strategic. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady my thoughts. "And after?" I pressed. He stepped closer, stopping just short of crossing into my space. "After," he said, voice low but clear, "you decide whether you return to the life you had or remain in the one you have stepped into." The choice was real. I could feel it. But choices tied to powerful men rarely came without gravity. I met his eyes, searching for manipulation. I found something else. Resolve. And beneath it, something almost protective. For the first time since the storm began, I did not feel like an accident in his world. I felt like a variable he intended to safeguard. The silence that followed his words did not feel empty. It felt decisive. I stood in the center of his office, sunlight stretching across the polished floor between us, and understood that the choice he offered was real but heavy. Return to the life I had built in quiet corners of the world, or remain in one that moved with guarded gates and measured authority. "You speak about this like it is simple," I said softly. "It is not simple." His voice carried no impatience, only steadiness. "It is necessary." I walked toward the glass wall and looked out at the hillside beyond the estate. The city shimmered in the distance, indifferent to what had shifted inside me. Less than 24 hours ago, I had been grading spelling tests at my kitchen table. Now I was being asked to measure my future against a man who commanded rooms without raising his voice. "If I leave," I said quietly, "does this disappear?" He did not answer immediately. He stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the calm warmth of his presence without being touched. "The attention will," he said. "The awareness will not." I turned to face him fully. "And if I stay?" His gaze did not waver. "Then you stay because you choose to stand where you can be seen." The words echoed in my chest. Seen. Not hidden. Not invisible. I searched his expression for control, for expectation, for any sign that he was shaping my answer. I found none. Only patience. The kind that comes from someone accustomed to waiting out entire storms. I exhaled slowly. "You assume I want to be part of this world." A faint shift crossed his features. I assume you do not run from what you have already stepped into. The truth of that settled quietly between us. I had opened the door. I had lied. I had followed him into a convoy under a dark sky. None of that had been forced. It had been chosen in small, steady decisions. You said I am no longer invisible. I reminded him. Is that what you want? His answer came without hesitation. I want you safe. The simplicity of it disarmed me. Not I want you here. Not I want you mine. Safe. I studied him. This man who moved through power as if it were oxygen, and saw something else beneath it. Weariness. Responsibility. The cost of being watched and watching back. Then let me decide from strength, not fear, I said quietly. Something shifted in his eyes, subtle but unmistakable. Respect. He stepped back, giving space instead of taking it. Very well, he said. Decide. The sunlight warmed my face as I looked once more at the city below. I realized then that storms do not only destroy. Sometimes they reveal what was already standing beneath the surface. I turned back to him, heart steady now. Whatever I chose, it would not be because I was pulled. It would be because I stepped forward.